Right, how are we doing everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're talking about the role of my right arm or your trail arm in the golf swing. If you're new to the channel, then basically what I spend my time doing and what I've been doing as a part of a series at the moment is breaking the golf swing down and talking about each part detailed as to what needs to happen, accompanied by things like drills and exercises. And basically what I've very much been talking about, over summarising it as briefly as I can, is I've talked about the importance of the backswing to find a way to turn correctly but also to put pressure into the ground. I've then talked about the importance of opening up the hips whilst the weight is still on the trail side. And then I've also recently just been talking about the idea that as we continue this rotation, before you start consciously pulling your arms down, the weight will start to move more in towards my lead heel. Now, what would basically happen from this position is that, very hypothetically, if you were able to demonstrate those movements, that you would become quite competent at being able to hit the ball, right? Basically, if you're struggling with your game, it's because you're doing one of those things wrong. Your backswing's wrong, and then therefore you can't transition, or your backswing's okay, but you don't understand how to transition, so on and so forth, right? What we need to talk about is the role of this hand, because this hand is what's going to help us keep the club on plane. I've done videos in the past about the trail hand, and I've talked about it in more detail as well, to be fair, right? So I've talked about effectively what should happen in more detail than what I'm going to do today. But the idea of this hand is that wherever you are at the top of your backswing position, as you start to open up your pelvis, that creates space for you to drive the elbow in front, or at least to the side, depending on your range of motion, which we'll talk about briefly. That helps you keep the club on plane. And then therefore, the better this arm functions and the better it matches your rotation, the more you're going to have a desirable impact, where you're going to look more this way rather than straight arm flippy. When I've done videos in the past, and that's why now I try and consciously make more of an effort to do them in series, is because quite a lot of golfers like the idea of driving the elbow, and they felt that was an immediate answer to their problems. And it is, right? You would need to think about this. It's the same as throwing a ball in terms of the concept of driving the elbow. The complication is, when I sometimes meet people for lessons, is that they've really tried hard to drive the elbow, but the pelvis hasn't created any rotation, so there's no space. So it doesn't materialise anyway. You know, there's absolutely no benefit to doing things like driving the elbow if your pelvis is moving this way. So what I talked about in the backswing is I talked about your ability to create an external shoulder rotation. So you can see the way that my forearm can go back. That would basically mean at the top of my backswing, I could swing up to the top, and instead of my forearm having to be parallel to my spine, I could go more vertical while still staying in posture. Now, as I start to talk about the concept of how to hold on to lag and create a larger separation, which is potentially more powerful, you would have to be able to create an external rotation to move this way. The reason why that's important is because if you can't create an external rotation, which to be honest is most people, because if you're somebody who commutes, if you're somebody who types, you're going to lose this sort of range of motion. Yes, you can work on it, but I don't know how long it would take. It depends on each individual. So my point is that if you're somebody who can't create an external rotation, then on the way down, you don't want to be trying to really kind of drive your elbow forward, because basically what would happen is that it would start to encourage an early hip extension and move this way. If you're somebody who can create an external, then when I start to talk about how to shallow the golf club and how to hold on to lag for longer, that would be more applicable for you. Now, it doesn't matter anyway, because even if you're somebody who can't create a huge range of external, it doesn't stop you from driving the elbow towards you. You can see the way my forearm stays this way instead of going more upward facing. The feeling would still be the same. You would still want to feel like your forearm stays upward facing. It's just that you won't be able to drive the elbow in front of the hip as much. You would just drive it more alongside the hip to make sure that you come down on plane. I think it's important, because I think if you tell yourself the wrong story in golf, if you tell yourself this desirable idea that, oh yeah, I want to drive my elbow forward, but you don't possess the range of motion, then the question would be, well, how are you going to achieve that? And then for me, it would be like, well, the only way somebody can create this is by going this way. And that's what I mean. All of a sudden you start trying to drive your elbow. Yeah, you'll shallow the club out, but if you start to drift closer towards the golf ball, you'll never hit it any better. So for me, the fundamental thing that every golfer should do in their golf swing is that they should trigger a rotation and they should stay in posture, right? You don't necessarily want to do things like early hip extend or slide around, because you're going to really struggle with your consistency. But what I'm talking about in terms of the function of this hand is just be slightly careful. If you can't create an external rotation, then don't worry about it. But as you start the downswing, see the way I can drive my elbow still So as I start to come down, I can still bring the club down on plane. The feeling will be that, yeah, you want to try and keep the forearm upward facing as you drive down. It's just that, like I keep reiterating, you might not want to drive it as much in front if you don't possess that range of motion. So your right elbow plays very much a role in helping you keep the club on plane. By keeping the club on plane, then all of a sudden, see the way I can bring my elbow down. So if I mimic somebody who can't create an external rotation, it would look this way. For somebody who can create an external rotation, it would start to look this way, and you'd possess the ability to create more of a shallowing in that transition. Sometimes when I meet people for lessons, they're disappointed if I suggest that you shouldn't be doing this and they feel like they're losing out. In the context of things, you will dramatically improve if you understand how to turn correctly and how to be able to function to help yourself stay on plane. You would revolutionize your golf, so don't become despondent. But like I keep saying, if you tell yourself the wrong idea, one, you can't physically achieve it, and two, it will cause a different discrepancy in your game because you're trying to achieve the thing you can't physically do. So the role of the right hand is to help you keep the club on plane. It should stay bent as you drive it down towards your side of your hip. From here, basically, depending on whatever plane line you swing on, which means that for golfers that would come down a bit more vertically, as opposed to golfers that would want to drop the club more to the side of them, would change the angle on the back of the trail wrist. This won't matter too much, and I'll start to talk about this in more detail soon, but you can see here, as I'm dropping my elbow to the side of my hip, the way that I'm keeping this forearm upward facing as opposed to doing this. This would get that too vertical nature. And basically what would start to happen is that if you do the previous lesson, which is open up, then there is space to be able to drive this elbow. All I'm trying to say is don't try and copy DJ in this transition unless you actually possess the range of motion to be able to demonstrate that movement. Right arm tries to stay bent. You're trying to drive the elbow next to that right hip. And from there, you're trying to keep that forearm upward facing as you come in towards the hip because it's going to help you keep the club on plane. What you want to do is make sure that you are first and foremost creating rotation to create space to do the things that I've talked about. Because like I said, if you're somebody who looks like this at impact, that's not going to be because your right arm is not functioning correctly. It's because that you're not opening up and creating space to swing into. So we understand that this arm is going to help us swing the club on plane. This arm is going to help us hold on to lag for longer. And this arm is going to basically be the thing that is supporting the club coming down in towards the back of the hip. But this arm can only function anywhere near its optimum based on two things from today's video. One, that you create space in that transitional area so there is room to drive into. And two, that you understand your limitations as to what you're trying to do with the arm. Don't try and force it this way if you don't possess the range. Just get it to the next of you, keep the forearm upward facing, and then from there you can start to talk about the release and the hit. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Right, remember, as always, I appreciate a thumbs up. I remember also it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you're going to press the subscribe button, then you might as well press the little bell icon because that means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out. It's also free to send swings into the channel, right? My social media links are in the description box below. It's where you can send swings in. It's where you can see annotations over other swings that I've already done, which is good to learn from. Work on it. Have a go with the elbow. We're going to start talking about some drills and exercises. I'll catch up with you guys again soon.